Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Adam Rockefeller Growald. Adam, give him a warm welcome.
Thanks. Thank you, Greg, and thank you all. I'm glad I'm not later in the afternoon, so that would be like the highest pressure. This is great. So yeah, as Greg said, I'm going to give a little bit of a different talk today. I know this morning has been focused on, much more scientific. This is a little bit more emotional, I guess, for lack of a better word. So a little bit about my background. I'm a Rockefeller on my mother's side. I'm a Jew on my dad's side. Told that to my real estate broker. She used to be a psychologist, and she said, "Oh, honey, have you got money issues?" So it was actually my mother, Eileen Rockefeller, who was originally planning to speak here today. We all know the tale of Abraham and Isaac, where God commanded Abraham to sacrifice his firstborn son. So my mother converted to Judaism after marrying my father, and I think the confirmation that she's really taken that on as her own is that when she wasn't able to come, her solution was to send her firstborn son as an offering. So who am I? I'm the second youngest grandson of David Rockefeller. Pictured here are my grandparents, David and Peggy. I'm the great-great-grandson of John D. Rockefeller Sr. Since graduating from Princeton in 2008, I've been a management consultant for Bain, a media startup entrepreneur, a brand strategy consultant for Lippincott, and a speaker about happiness, purpose, and connection. So I really am here today to talk both about money and meaning. A little more context. So this is my family. My mother, my brother Danny, myself, my father Paul, and my grandfather David. Just over 2 weeks ago, my dad underwent heart surgery at the Cleveland Clinic. The surgery ended up having some complications, and what should have been a straightforward procedure ended up being 7 hours in the operating room. I'm grateful and unbelievably relieved to say that he's now totally fine, and he's actually on his way home to Vermont today. But his longer than expected hospital stay is the reason that my mother couldn't come. So in the weeks leading up to my dad's surgery, I thought I was doing fine. I didn't really have any fear. It was mitral valve replacement, and for those of you who know about heart surgery, it's one of the more straightforward heart operations. But a few days before his operation, I got in touch with my fear around it, and I realized that I actually was scared. And when it came down to it, the source of that fear, it wasn't fear of death itself. Rather, it was a fear that what if my father dies and hasn't really understood just how much I love him and how grateful I am for giving me my life. And I called him and I told him that. I said, this is what I'm actually concerned about. And that was the most incredible thing, to be able to have that honest a conversation with my dad. I know it meant a lot to him too. And then when he came out on the other side, we talked about what our fear had been like while he was in there, and he admitted that he was more scared than he'd realized. When life is hanging by a Gore-Tex thread, in a way, all the voices of should and more and buy and achieve just drop away. And in the silence, the persistent whisper of truth suddenly becomes the loudest voice in the room. The experience of closeness with death brings into focus what's important in life. And so what is that? We all know what really matters. It's love, it's connection with other people, it's making a difference for something bigger than ourselves. At our most recent family meeting this past December, one of my cousins observed that any investment that we make in ourselves ultimately goes to zero. But any investment of ourselves that we make into something greater, into the world, will appreciate in perpetuity. So it's these things, love, connection, service to the world, that are the core values of my own family on both sides. I'll take you through just a few photographs of my family through the generations. So the first generation, this is John D. Rockefeller Sr. and Laura Spellman Rockefeller. And it really all started with him. Obviously, the business started with him, but these values started with him. And the second generation, John D. Rockefeller Jr. and his wife Abby. Here are all three generations, the first three generations together. The third generation, 6 kids. My grandfather was the youngest. And what's really interesting about the third generation, the brothers, as they were then called, got together on a regular basis to discuss what they were up to in the world. And they were really different things. They weren't just all pursuing the same thing that their father and their father's father had done. They had diverse interests, and they supported each other in that. And I think that's really important for any family, is to recognize what we've received and also be able to determine what our own interests are and what we're going to contribute uniquely to the world. So fourth generation, affectionately called the cousins. This is just one branch. It's my mother and her siblings. She's the youngest there. And then the fifth, sixth, and seventh generations. Now a motley crew. So as I said, family unity and intergenerational connection were important to my great-great-grandfather. This is a picture of John D. Rockefeller Sr. with his grandson, David, my grandfather. The tradition continues. This is David with me when I was about the age of him in that previous photograph. So despite the size and the diversity and the longevity of our family, we've maintained a very strong connection over time. What's really remarkable and what I'm grateful for is that my family has been so intentional about bringing the values to life and passing them on from one generation to the next, long past the point where there's a going concern that's the tie that binds us together. Our major liquidity event was in 1911, and yet we've maintained a close connection over 100 years since then. We now have 275 members of the family across 6 branches with a very rapidly growing 7th generation. We're dispersed across the country. Some of us live overseas. As I mentioned briefly, we hold a full weekend of family meetings twice a year. We have tools and regular processes for communicating with the family as a whole and supporting each other in our various projects, exactly the way that the brothers did when they started these meetings. So I don't need to tell you that connection with family is important. I know you get that. Instead, what I want to suggest is that it's possible to be as intentional about the way we connect with our families, the way that we develop and pass on a human legacy, as we are about the way that we create and pass on and manage our financial legacy. When it comes to activities around money, the process is quite straightforward. You develop your goals after taking stock of where you are now, and then you develop a strategy to get there, and then you execute on that strategy. Of course, there's a huge amount of subtlety and hard work and expertise that goes into that, but the fundamental process is straightforward. But when it comes to connecting with our families, the process isn't much of a process at all at times. It's just something that we have to make up as we go along, or so we think. Now, the problem with that approach is it gets you stuck with whatever kind of family dynamic you have today, whether you like it or not. Can you imagine if we took that type of approach to investing? Oh yeah, this stock is going nowhere, but we have a lot of it, so I guess we better just hang on and hope for the best. You know, no group knows better than this one that hope alone doesn't accomplish anything. But it doesn't have to be like that with the way we connect with our families. And the alternative really isn't that different from building an organization or conducting any kind of financial planning. So I'd argue there are lots of different ways that you could talk about this, but one way of thinking about it is first, develop a vision. Like most great things we achieve, creating a strong family, creating a human legacy begins with developing a picture of where you want to go. Simply recognizing that you want to have a close family is really the first step. Second, it takes a commitment. Choosing to make connection a priority. This isn't to say that it takes consensus and that the entire family has to want the same goals. Quite to the contrary, I think one committed person can really transform their entire family, but the commitment has to start somewhere. Finally, action. Commitment's nothing without action to back it up. Things like having dinner with my family when I was growing up. My dad had a business on the East Coast, and so he would travel there for about a week out of every month. But when he was in California, we had dinner 5 to 7 nights a week as a family. And it was there that I really learned what my parents valued. That's where I learned how to have conversation. The point I really want to make is simply that it takes intentionality, and it takes a kind of commitment that leads to investment. And when you put the structures in place that support what you want, that's when you succeed. I think the takeaway is that most of us, most of the time, live like our lives are something we read out of a book that's already been written. But it doesn't have to be that way. The truth, I think, is that we have an opportunity every day to write our own lives onto the paper of possibility. Or since we're in Beverly Hills, maybe a film analogy would make more sense. Have you seen Gravity? I'm sure many of you have seen Gravity. It's basically 2 actors. I was just awestruck seeing the credits for that movie at what it takes to create that film. We each have so many people who appear in the credits of our own lives, and we're in the credits of everybody we touch in any way, big or small. You can't make a movie alone. There probably are some divas out there who'd like to think that they could, but it takes a huge crew of people and planning and a script and multiple takes and revisions and on and on and on. So if it takes all that work to make a great movie, imagine what it takes to make a great life. So this should be our goal, to create a life that moves us, that inspires us, that makes us completely forget about our cell phones and who has better taste in business cards. To create a life where we laugh, not because it's funny, but because it's true. Where we cry because we feel joy deeply, just as we wince with loss and letdown. To create a life such that when at last we get to the end and the house lights come up, nothing needs to be said because the movie said it all. So we just hug the people we came with, and with a smile, we go home. Thank you. So I'd be happy to take, with whatever time we have left.
We have a couple time for maybe 1 or 2 quick questions for Adam. Thank you very much, Adam. That was very, very amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've got one over here, Pamela.
So tell me about the Rockefellers and what their contribution was to the colonial Williamsburg and that great place.
Yeah, sure. So I won't read the book on this because we're out of time and I don't have it with me. But the thing that I'd say about Williamsburg is that it really represents the way that every generation of my family, starting way back in the day, has taken such a personal interest in things that matter to them. So my great-grandfather used to walk around Williamsburg with a folding ruler in his pocket, and he would measure the way that he would literally measure buildings as they were being reconstructed to make sure it was done accurately. He was so passionate about it. He walked the woods and defined the paths for the carriage trails up in Acadia the same way. He wasn't just going to write a check and say that's it. He cared so personally that he was going to invest his time, and that's something that's continued.
Again, thank you very much, Adam.
Thank you so
for
much.
flying out and braving the airports to get out here. Thank you so much.